The biggest mistake a powerful woman can make is making herself smaller just to shield a man's fragile ego. My name is Cora. I'm 32, and for 2 years I buried my real abilities under the quiet routine of a devoted housewife. That disguise fell apart during a packed family gathering in Philadelphia. My husband stood at the center of our living room, glass of champagne raised, celebrating his new title of managing director. The room hummed with congratulations until he turned and fixed his eyes on me. He stared me down and said the words designed to crush me. "You've mooched off me for 2 years," he announced to the whole room. "Aside from cooking, you're completely worthless. You can't even give me a child." Before his insult had even finished echoing, his mother stepped forward. She coldly slid a ready-made set of divorce papers across the glass coffee table. "Sign it," she ordered. "Now that my son's an executive, you're simply not good enough for him anymore." I didn't scream or fall apart the way they clearly expected. Instead, a strange, total calm settled over me. I picked up the pen without a flicker of hesitation and signed my name at the bottom, never bothering to read a word of it. I turned and walked out the door, leaving them to their smug celebration. They believed they'd tossed aside a useless housewife, never suspecting they'd just picked a fight with the person quietly running their entire financial life. If you want to see the brutal reality waiting for him at the office the next morning, drop a comment below. We've got plenty more satisfying stories in store for you, so go ahead and subscribe to Revenge Mode so you never miss a moment of karma. Let's keep going. The stifling air of the living room disappeared behind the slammed door. I walked straight down the hallway to the master bedroom without a single glance back at the party. I pulled a small canvas suitcase from the closet and packed with careful precision, taking only the cheap cotton shirts, worn jeans, and generic shoes I'd worn for the past 2 years to keep up appearances. Everything else, I left behind on purpose: the custom Italian leather sofa in the den, the imported espresso machine on the counter, the hidden stash of luxury watches in the bottom drawer. I'd bought every one of those things through untraceable accounts just so they could live comfortably without ever questioning where the money came from. They could keep the furniture. They were about to lose the fortune underneath it. I zipped the bag shut, stepped out into the cold night air, and called a cab. Riding in the back seat through the streets of Philadelphia, I watched the city lights streak past the window. The quiet gave me space to think back on the choice that had brought me to this moment. I'm the sole heir to one of the biggest pharmaceutical empires on the East Coast. My whole life had been boardrooms and people who only ever saw the dollar signs tied to my last name. 2 years ago, I decided to walk away from all of it. I settled into an ordinary suburban house and hid my fortune behind the mask of an unremarkable housewife. I wanted to find out whether real love, built on respect instead of money, was even possible. I gave him my time and my full loyalty to see who he really was once he believed he held all the power. The experiment was finished now. I pulled out my phone and dialed a private number. The call connected instantly. I spoke directly to my attorney, Franklin, and told him the domestic trial had officially ended. I instructed him to restore my executive access at the company immediately, prepare the legal groundwork for a fast corporate takeover, and let the board know my time away was over. Franklin didn't waste a second on unnecessary questions. He simply confirmed the orders and promised everything digital would be up and running within the hour. I ended the call and felt the last remnants of the meek persona I'd worn fall away. The taxi pulled up outside a guarded residential high-rise in downtown Philadelphia. I paid the driver and walked through the reinforced glass doors. The concierge recognized me at once and led me to the private elevator, which opened straight into my personal penthouse. The space was sprawling, minimalist, and wired with the highest tier of digital security. I stepped into the master suite, dropped the canvas bag on the floor, and shed the plain cotton clothes. In the closet, I found a tailored business suit. As I buttoned the blazer and studied my reflection, I saw someone new looking back, no longer a domestic servant waiting to be validated, but a corporate predator returning to her territory. I went into the home office and sat down behind the steel desk. I powered up the private server and logged into the executive network with my master credentials. The screen lit the room, revealing the financial machinery I controlled as majority shareholder. For the last 2 years, I had secretly steered his entire career. I was the unseen hand approving the investment decisions that favored his division, quietly funneling extra budget into his projects, and directing our most valuable clients his way to keep his numbers looking perfect. I had pushed him up the ladder one rung at a time, letting him believe every promotion was earned on merit alone. Without a moment's hesitation, I ran a series of system overrides, revoking every hidden privilege I'd granted him. I cut off the budget streams feeding his department and cancelled every client transfer scheduled for his team. Tomorrow, he'd walk into his new executive role stripped of the invisible support that had carried him there, and I knew exactly how quickly he'd fall apart. At 8:30 that night, I opened a secure video call from my desk terminal. The screen split as the senior executives logged onto the encrypted line. I looked at HR Director Mark and Legal Head Sarah, both alert, understanding that a mandatory Sunday night meeting meant a major shakeup was coming. Skipping the usual pleasantries, I got straight to the point regarding the announcement made that afternoon. I looked into the camera and gave the order: suspend Ian's appointment as managing director, and revoke all of his system access immediately. Mark didn't hesitate or ask for clarification on the sudden reversal. His fingers flew across his keyboard as he pulled up the master employee database. On my second monitor, I watched him navigate to the executive roster, locate the profile, and trigger the override. Within seconds, Mark had changed the employment status from active to under internal investigation. Then he cut the link between the central server and every device registered to that profile. The corporate email account went dark instantly, and any syncing to phones or laptops stopped for good. The digital lockout was total and could only be reversed with my direct approval. I then turned to the financial side and told Sarah to loop in the Treasury Department. I ordered the finance team to freeze the corporate credit card tied to his new position, along with every expense account and travel budget linked to his name. A necessary move to stop any last-minute spending or fund diversion before news of the termination got out. Treasury executed the freeze within minutes, cutting off his ability to spend a single dollar of company money. Every pending transaction was flagged for manual review, and the automated reimbursement system was disabled for his profile. Franklin sat across from me in the penthouse office, monitoring the security feeds on his tablet. He'd already coordinated with facilities at headquarters, and confirmed that building security had received the order too. His badge would be deactivated right at the turnstiles the next morning. The physical perimeter was now every bit as locked down as the digital one. Front desk security had been briefed on the new protocols, ensuring no one could slip in on the strength of an old executive badge. The trap was fully set, waiting for him to walk into it at the start of the workday. The last piece of that night's work was assembling the evidence to justify the termination, and any legal action that might follow. I sent an urgent directive to internal audit, ordering the lead auditors to work through the night reviewing every financial report, expense claim, and distribution contract he'd signed over the past 12 months. I wanted a full forensic sweep of the revenue streams and vendor agreements, tracing every dollar and verifying the legitimacy of every third-party logistics partner he'd brought on. This wasn't a routine HR review, it was a targeted hunt for discrepancies, kickbacks, or outright fraud buried in the department's budget. The audit team accepted the assignment and began pulling archived files from secure storage, ready to spend the next 10 hours combing through a year of transactions for the evidence needed to turn a simple firing into a real legal reckoning. I logged off, closed the terminal, and knew the machinery was already grinding forward to dismantle the career I'd once helped build. At 6 the next morning, a sharp knock sounded before Franklin let himself into the office and walked to my desk. He set down a thick manila folder containing the overnight findings from the audit team and my private investigators, then stepped back and let me look through it in silence. I opened the cover and began reading the first section of the financial audit. The spreadsheets laid out a steady, deliberate drain on our joint checking account over the past year. Ian had been quietly transferring tens of thousands of dollars into untraceable accounts, breaking the withdrawals into small, randomized amounts to dodge any bank alerts. For months he'd skimmed money I'd set aside for household expenses to fund his own hidden agenda, confident his manipulation would stay buried under my quiet exterior. I turned the page and found a separate file attached to the bank records. Franklin leaned in and pointed to a surveillance photo clipped to the top of the stack. "We found out he's been having an affair with a woman named Ruby for the past 6 months," Franklin said. "He's been covering all of her expenses." I picked up the photographs and studied the timeline of his deception, images of them dining at upscale restaurants, leaving designer boutiques, entering a high-end apartment complex across town. The financial records confirmed he was paying her rent and funding her lifestyle with the very money he'd stolen from our account. I looked over the attached receipts: designer handbags, diamond jewelry, expensive weekend trips. A cold clarity settled in as I lined up the dates with his behavior at home. He'd been buying luxury gifts for his mistress while standing in our living room calling me a useless freeloader. He'd built his entire arrogant image, and funded his double life, entirely on my money, all while treating me like dead weight. I didn't feel heartbreak or betrayal as I went through the evidence. I only felt a sharp, methodical urge to take apart every comfort he thought he still had. The house he was currently living in with his mother was next on the list. I gathered the photos, bank statements, and audit spreadsheets, squared the edges, and slid them back into the folder. Closing it, I said flatly, "Prepare the property paperwork. I paid for that house in full, in cash. Revoke his right to live there, today." Franklin nodded immediately, understanding exactly where this was headed. He pulled out his laptop and started drafting the filing right at my desk. Since I'd transferred the full purchase price from my private trust before ever letting him put his name on the deed, the legal ownership was firmly on my side. Franklin used a specific fraud clause in local property law to set an emergency repossession in motion, preparing the injunction to file the moment the court opened. The plan was built to move fast and leave no gaps. He finalized the petition for an immediate eviction, citing documented financial fraud and breach of fiduciary duty as grounds for the emergency order. The goal was a court-approved lockout before Ian even realized his corporate career was already finished. By the time the judge's signature dried, Ian and his family would be legally barred from setting foot on that property again, no chance to return, pack up the furniture, or claim anything inside. I watched Franklin comb through the final pages, checking every statute to make sure there were no gaps. The legal wall was complete. He sent the file straight to the courthouse and packed up his gear, ready to carry out the lockout that afternoon. At 7:15 that morning, my desk terminal chimed with an urgent message. The audit team had finished their forensic review after working through the night. I opened the encrypted file and downloaded the report. The pages were heavily marked in red, flagging serious irregularities in the pharmaceutical distribution pipeline. The auditors had gotten into the protected departmental drives and pulled the raw procurement data. I spread the spreadsheets across both monitors and started going through the flagged transactions. The pattern was deliberate and sophisticated. Ian had systematically falsified quarterly revenue reports to inflate his department's numbers. Beyond the doctored figures, the raw data revealed outright theft. He'd signed off on fake delivery records authorizing large shipments of our highest-value medical inventory to shell companies that didn't exist. He'd used his newly acquired clearance to skip standard compliance checks, register phantom vendors, and generate fake invoices, pocketing the distribution commissions and funneling company money into hidden accounts. The video call connected automatically, showing David, the head of audit, seated in the main conference room, surrounded by stacks of printed ledgers, exhausted but resolute. He adjusted his microphone and looked into the camera. "Madam Chairman, he's embezzled corporate funds continuously for the past 3 quarters. This is more than enough for criminal prosecution," David reported. I minimized the feed and pulled up the personal financial file Franklin had brought me earlier, laying the corporate audit next to the private banking records. I cross-checked the dates and figures. They matched perfectly. The illegal payouts from the shell companies lined up exactly with the cash flow funding his new lifestyle. Every fake shipment logged in the system was followed. Days later, by a withdrawal from his hidden accounts to cover designer purchases, expensive dinners, and luxury trips. Every dollar spent on Ruby had been stolen straight from my company. He hadn't just betrayed our marriage, he'd systematically looted the empire I'd built. It was undeniable proof of corruption from the inside out. I immediately called Sarah in legal on the secure line and told her team to compile the raw data without delay, the falsified reports, the fake delivery manifests, the shell company account numbers, into one complete legal file. They were to draft a formal whistleblower complaint and send a certified copy straight to the Federal Economic Investigation Agency. A formal criminal investigation would permanently freeze his professional credentials and close off any escape route. He wouldn't be able to quietly resign, negotiate severance, or ever land another job in the industry. The legal case was airtight, and the preparations were complete. I'd cut off his money, secured the house, and guaranteed a criminal investigation was coming. I picked up my coffee cup and took a slow sip, then looked across the desk at Franklin and smiled, cold, certain, completely in control. Have the HR director give him a warm welcome at 8. I want him to understand exactly what it feels like to lose everything, I said calmly. Franklin nodded, packed his tablet into his briefcase, and knew the trap was armed and ready. At exactly 8 o'clock, the executive floor was thick with tension. Ian strode confidently into the main lobby, dressed in an expensive new suit, clearly expecting a morning full of applause from his staff. He walked past reception without a glance and headed straight for the executive elevators, swiping his keycard against the scanner. Instead of the usual chime and opening gate, the system let out a harsh error tone and flashed red. Frowning, he swiped again, then a third time. The gate stayed locked, the red light blinking a clear denial. Employees arriving for their shift slowed down to watch the newly appointed executive struggle at the entrance. The glass door of the ground floor conference room opened, and Mark, the HR director, walked out flanked by 2 security guards in dark tactical gear. He carried an empty cardboard box under one arm and a formal document stamped with a red corporate seal in his hand. He stopped in front of the locked gate, facing Ian through the glass. The lobby went dead silent as everyone recognized the standard termination protocol playing out. Mark skipped any greeting and simply began reading the official termination order aloud, his voice carrying clearly across the marble floor. He announced that Ian was stripped of his managing director title, effective immediately, citing severe document fraud and systematic embezzlement as grounds. The employees around them gasped and exchanged shocked looks as the accusations landed in the middle of the lobby. Ian froze for a second before his face flushed with fury. He slammed his fist against the gate, glaring at Mark and the guards. Are you all insane? I was just promoted. Get the chairman down here right now, he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. Mark didn't flinch. He calmly turned the termination letter around, pressing the back of it against the glass so the signature was visible. The person who signed this termination is the chairman of the company, Mark said evenly. She wants to know if you recognize your wife's signature. Before Ian could process it, the massive screen on the lobby wall flickered to life. The usual corporate promo reel vanished, replaced by a live feed from the executive boardroom on the top floor. I sat at the head of the long table, dressed in a sharp suit, looking straight into the camera. The whole lobby turned to watch the broadcast. Ian slowly turned his head to follow their gaze, looking up to see my face towering above him on the screen. The color drained from his face. His legs buckled, and he stumbled backward against the scanner for support. Every trace of the arrogance he'd walked in with vanished. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The woman he'd humiliated and discarded just hours earlier was the very same person holding total power over his career, his money, and his future. He looked back at the signature on the glass, then up at the screen again, trapped with nowhere to turn. The 2 guards stepped forward and released the gate just enough to slide the empty box through, telling him to hand over his company phone and car keys. With shaking hands, he pulled the items from his pockets and dropped them into the box, standing in the middle of the lobby, surrounded by staring employees, stripped of every shred of dignity. At 4 that afternoon, Ian scrambled out of a taxi before it had fully stopped at the curb and sprinted across the lawn, desperate to grab any valuables, cash, or documents before the legal freeze took full effect. He reached the porch and stopped cold. For private security contractors in dark tactical gear were pulling apart the front door, having already removed the old locks and begun drilling for a new smart security system. Ian shouted at them to back off his property, but they ignored him completely and kept working. A rideshare pulled up right behind the idling taxi, and Mildred and Ruby stepped out carrying shopping bags from a high-end boutique. They walked toward the porch, confused by the security team, until Ruby spotted the men changing the locks. She dropped her bags and stormed up the steps, yelling at the contractors to stop, insisting she was the future owner of the house and threatening to call the police. A sleek black sedan pulled up along the curb behind the rideshare. I stepped out onto the pavement as Franklin got out from the driver's side, holding a thick leather folder. We walked up the driveway together, Franklin carrying the original deed and the eviction order a municipal judge had signed just 2 hours earlier. The shouting on the porch stopped the moment they noticed us approaching. Ian looked at me, his eyes wide with fear and lingering rage. Mildred stared in shock, unable to process how a quiet housewife had turned into a commanding executive overnight. I stopped at the base of the steps, took the folder from Franklin, and dropped it on the grass at their feet. The documents spilled out, showing the bright red court seals and bold eviction text. "This house was paid for entirely with my own money," I said coldly. "You have 10 minutes to grab your things and leave." Ian stared down at the notice, finally understanding that his ruin was total and irreversible: no bank access, no job, and now no home. Desperate, he turned to Ruby, grabbing her arm and begging her to help him find a temporary apartment using the cash he'd given her over the past few months, rapidly explaining the firing and the criminal charges closing in. Ruby listened in stunned silence, looking at his ruined suit, his panicked face, the paper scattered across the lawn. It hit her instantly: the wealthy executive she'd landed was now a liability. She yanked her arm free, stepping back with open disgust. "You think I'm sticking around with a broke guy who's about to go to prison? Wake up," she sneered. She turned, grabbed her bags, and walked off without a backward glance. Ian lunged after her, but Mildred grabbed his shoulder, screaming at him for throwing everything away over a mistress who'd just abandoned him. He spun around and screamed back, blaming her for feeding his arrogance and pushing for the divorce in the first place. They stood on the sidewalk tearing each other apart with accusations, the illusion of their perfect family collapsing in front of the whole neighborhood. I didn't stick around to watch the rest. I turned my back, walked to the sedan, and pulled the door shut behind me, cutting my ties to them for good. 6 months later, the legal process wrapped up with remarkable speed. The family court finalized the divorce without a hitch. Because Franklin had presented undeniable proof of prenuptial agreement violations alongside the ongoing federal fraud case, the judge stripped Ian of any claim to our marital assets entirely. He tried to contest the ruling at the final hearing, but the mountain of documented evidence left his lawyer with nothing to work with. The gavel came down, and the marriage was officially over. He walked out of the courtroom with nothing to his name. Word of his corporate fraud and embezzlement spread quickly through the industry's professional networks. Pharmaceutical circles are tightly connected, and background checks are strict. The consequences were immediate and severe. No reputable company would touch an executive tied to a scandal that size, and his professional reputation was finished for good. Stripped of his career and buried under court-ordered restitution, he ended up in one of the few fields that didn't require a clean record. He now works grueling shifts at a suburban logistics warehouse just to keep up with his minimum payments, loading freight trucks under managers who demand strict quotas, a stark contrast to the corner office he briefly held. The fallout reached his mother too. Without her son's financial backing, Mildred couldn't keep up her lifestyle. Facing foreclosure and needing to cover Ian's steep legal fees, she was forced to sell her house at a loss, liquidate what remained, and move into a small, run-down apartment on the far edge of the city, cut off entirely from the social circle she once prized. She spends her days counting every penny and regretting the moment she slid those divorce papers across the table. The mistress who helped set off the whole collapse didn't stick around to share in the wreckage either. Ruby quickly realized the money had dried up for good. She gathered every piece of designer jewelry and luxury item Ian had bought her with stolen funds, pawned it all for cash, and moved on to find her next target, vanishing without a trace or a forwarding address. Her sudden disappearance left Ian completely alone, carrying a mountain of credit card debt he had no way of repaying. As for me, I left that chapter behind entirely and poured my full attention back into running the pharmaceutical company. Freed from the weight of a toxic marriage, my focus sharpened. Over the following 2 quarters, I led 2 major mergers, significantly expanding our distribution network along the coast, and set up a new governance board to guarantee full transparency going forward. The internal cleanup rooted out the corruption he'd introduced, and the company went on to post record-breaking revenue for the new fiscal year. The clearest lesson I took from all of this is that financial independence and unshakable self-control are a woman's strongest armor. Sacrificing your own ambitions and hiding your true abilities to protect someone else's ego will never earn you loyalty, it only creates arrogant, deluded people who mistake your quiet grace for weakness. In the real world, deceit, calculated theft, and using people never hold up. They always come with a steep price once they're exposed to the full weight of the law and the consequences that follow. The truth always brings down a foundation built on lies. Thank you so much for sticking with this story all the way to the end. I really appreciate you spending this time with me. What do you think of the ending Ian got? Drop a comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more.